Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today is going to be the first in a series of videos about how the various regions of Canada might be impacted by local to global disaster scenarios. So we're going to go all the way across the map from the west coast to the Arctic, all the way over to the east coast, and determine the pros and cons of each region of Canada in terms of survivability post-collapse. In today's video, we're going to start out west, so we're going to be looking at the west coast, the interior BC, and the Canadian Rocky Mountains. So let's get to it. You can show your support for the After the Collapse series by liking, commenting, and sharing this video on other social media platforms. And make sure you click the bell next to the subscribe button to ensure that you're getting notifications when videos are posted. Enjoy the video. The 10 million square kilometers of Canada is a vast and everlasting landscape. Over 99% of the population lives below the 54th parallel. In layman's terms, 99% of the population lives very south of the country, close to the American border. It's the 49th parallel that separates Canada from the United States. One of the hallmarks of Canadian topography is the mighty boreal forest, which stretches the length of the country and comprises millions of square kilometers of forest that has never had foot set on by man. Much of it hasn't even been surveyed. All of this awaits the bold, post-apocalyptic adventurer, should they be cunning enough to traverse it. But not without challenges. There's a reason why Canada is so sparsely populated and why California is so jam-packed. Namely, it's because of the climate. Most of Canada gets so cold and uninhabitable that survivability is severely limited to select areas. The ecological carrying capacity of the land, in spite of having some of the largest reserves of wild game on the planet, simply cannot sustain large amounts of people using non-replenishable hunter-gathering methods that many people are going to naturally try to revert to and practice after a grid-down scenario ensues. And accessing most of this pristine wilderness without modern technology, whether by air, boat, or four-wheel all-terrain vehicles, would be nearly impossible. Perhaps the most human-friendly of the many biomes that characterizes the Canadian landscape would have to be the Pacific Northwest, also known by Canadians as the West Coast. This lies in the province now known as British Columbia. Now, the environment of the west coast of British Columbia is a very dense, old-growth forest for the most part. Lots of this is temperate rainforest. As you move towards the interior, once again, there's more alpine, mountainous regions. The lower interior of BC is also one of the warmest climates in Canada. It's actually one of the only deserts in Canada. It's referred to as the Okanagan Desert. However, it's not technically a desert. It's actually a shrub steppe biome. And within this biome, with proper irrigation, while the grid is up, scores of vineyards and fruit trees are abound. A significant portion of Canada's fresh produce is produced within this region. Native American tribes like the Nootka, the Chinook, and the Cowichan have lived in this land for thousands of years. These people will have an advantage in a societal collapse scenario, as many know how to live off the land. However, the often forced integration and domestication of many of the native peoples of Canada has caused many of their traditional skills to diminish. It's quite possible that within a grid-down post-collapse situation, this area is certainly going to be a magnet, at least for people in Western Canada looking to flee the killer cold of the Canadian winter. The Canadian population as it stands is about 35 million. If push came to shove, and if properly maintained, this region of Canada could foreseeably sustain a much larger population were it not exporting all of its goods around the world and using them domestically instead. Now, this is one of the richest regions in Canada in terms of food resources. It's one of the most productive places on Earth in terms of fish harvesting. It has some of the most abundant wild game on Earth. They have one of the longest growing seasons of any Canadian province, particularly in lower BC, where they grow things like peaches, cherries, apricots, and numerous other vegetables and fruits with the exception of citrus. Suffice it to say, self-sustaining horticulture with a diversity of crop options is most likely to occur within this region. Thus, it's most likely to support the highest human population densities post-SHTF. However, because of the general dryness of the Okanagan Desert, the ability to power large-scale irrigation systems is going to be essential. Now, because so many people will flock to this region, security may be a factor. In terms of firearm possession, the actual amount of guns in this region is relatively moderate. There's about 250,000 registered gun owners in this region, which amounts to about 6% of the population. In addition, because it's a coastal environment with many islands and many avid mariners, piracy will certainly be another security risk. High population densities within the areas of Vancouver and on the easternmost part of Vancouver Island could make for some problematic competition for resources within this region. Generally speaking, the population density drops significantly as you move towards the southern BC interior in the Okanagan Valley, but as said before, this will be a magnet in a post-collapse environment, and the population density is probably going to drastically increase. Another security threat in this region of the country is going to be the drug culture and the sheer amount of people who are trying to get their fix post-collapse. The infamous East Hastings Street in Vancouver is world-renowned for its high proportion of drug addicts. When the shit hits the fan, these people are going to need a fix, and they're going to have to find it somewhere. It's safe to say that they are likely wholly unprepared to survive as well. In spite of this, the standard of living in the West Coast is amongst the highest in the country. In fact, Vancouver is one of the most ridiculously high-priced places to live. What this also means is that most people are housebroke or spend the majority of their disposable income on things which make them a more efficient urban commuter and consumer. Thus, there will be many people who are unprepared. In spite of that, many people on Vancouver Island have contingency plans, as they do live along the Juan de Fuca fault line, which is a section of the proverbial ring of fire that surrounds the Pacific Ocean, a group of fault lines that are notorious for their intense seismic activity and could be activated at any moment. Thus, many people on the island are prepared for this potentiality. And although the exact amount of preppers and survivalist types is unknown within this region, it's safe to say that of these 250,000 gun owners, many of them also have wilderness and survival skills. These skills will be highly transferable post-collapse. Another potential security threat within this region that is non-human is the fact that this is home to some of the wildest, most ferocious predators on the planet. The highest density of North American cougars. In interior BC, there are grizzly bears, wolves, black bears, and all manner of predators scouring the forest for calories. Some environmental hazards, as indicated before, are earthquakes and of course tsunamis. Most of the population within Vancouver and Vancouver Island are trained to respond to the prospect of tsunamis. Because a significant portion of Vancouver Island rests well above sea level, much of the island would be spared the effects of a massive tsunami like the one that devastated the island of Japan in 2011. Another potential hazard in this region is going to be forest fires. Without man managing the forest as he has for decades, many of the forests that should have already burned and haven't will start to burn in a grid down situation. One other hazard, particularly of Vancouver Island, is going to be the high amount of rain. Although this is a good thing and acts as a source of fresh water, without proper shelter it can complicate life significantly for many months out of the year. Now, mobility in almost any part of British Columbia in a grid down situation is going to be very challenging. And I'm talking about mobility via vehicle. This is because the major roadways and corridors that link these different regions together are very limited and could easily succumb to some form of gridlock. Now, it's very feasible to assume from a military strategic standpoint that if we were ever in some sort of global conflict, these roadways that link these different regions together would probably be prime targets. Collapsing one of these mountainous highways could severely weaken the population's abilities to respond to any form of attack. In addition, about 99% of people access Vancouver Island through ferries, with the exception of the small few who have their own boats. These ferry terminals, like the major highways, are sure to be totally gridlocked in the case of a shit hits the fan situation. And unlike the Great Plains of Saskatchewan, where there are endless grid roads and detour possibilities, There are very few major corridors that are available to British Columbia consumers to get from point A to point B, especially on Vancouver Island. Now, some protective factors with regards to the Vancouver climate is that it is amongst the warmest and most hospitable in Canada. While Saskatchewan may be suspended in -40 below, Vancouver Island seldom falls below 0 degrees Celsius, and the Okanagan region seldom will fall below 10 degrees Celsius. The West Coast compared to the rest of Canada probably has one of the lowest population of pests such as mosquitoes, black flies, and other stinging insects. Although indeed in the Okanagan Desert there are black widows and venomous rattlesnakes. One other potential complicating factor on the West Coast if you're planning on using solar power is going to be the lack of direct sunlight. So the only thing that's going to work out here for a significant portion of the year and a significant portion of the day is going to be thin film amorphous solar panels. I've reviewed these on my channel before. There's a company called Power Film that's based out of the United States who manufactures these. I will post a link in the description. A person may be better off looking into wind and tidal power using water turbines as a more lucrative source of renewable energy within this region. Now, in terms of the population density of the region, there are 4.6 million people who live in British Columbia. This is approximately 1/8 of the entire Canadian population. At least half of this population is condensed around the Vancouver metro area, so as much as this will be a hub for people escaping the cold weather, a myriad of security threats are going to present themselves in this increasingly densely populated region that everybody is going to be flocking to. The demographics of Canada are predominantly Caucasian. However, within this region alone, 35% of the inhabitants have some Asian ancestry, one of the highest population densities of Asian ancestry on the North American continent. This multicultural diversity, while it has its numerous social benefits, may contribute to polarization post-collapse. Post-collapse segregation, or people aligning themselves along linguistic lines, should be expected. There are also about 250,000 people who can directly trace their lineage back to the First Nations people of Canada, also known as the Aboriginal people, known by some as Native Americans. Within these densely populated regions, you're going to have a higher gang presence. Gangs like the Red Scorpions, the United Nations, the Independent Soldiers, the Triads, and the Hells Angels will all be groups that are vying for power, amongst 175 others, most of which are lower-level street gangs. Additionally, within the Vancouver metro region, of course, there's going to be many prisons which are going to house many prisoners, not all of which are going to be accounted for in a shit-hits-the-fan situation. There are very few police officers to police this entire region, which numbers in the lower thousands. Thus, things are bound to get out of control very quickly. I'm pretty sure everybody remembers the Vancouver riots that took place when the Vancouver Canucks, a Canadian hockey team, lost the Stanley Cup. Well, just imagine how these people are going to act when they're rioting for food. Safe to say, this is going to be another major security threat. There are also numerous military bases, mostly naval and air force bases, within the West Coast and interior BC. The unique environment of the west coast of British Columbia, as abundant and plentiful as it may be with wilderness delicacies like salmon and crab, will not lend themselves to refugees without some toil and strife. The people most likely to survive there are the people who've built self-sustaining lives there right now. If you're serious about surviving shit hits the fan in Canada, British Columbia, particularly the parts on the west coast and the lower interior mainland, should be prime prospects for your consideration. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series as we delve further inland into the Rocky Mountains and the Great Canadian Prairies. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.